Today we have a very special guest joining us, Doug Coleman. Doug has over 30 years of experience in Mexico in mineral exploration, operations, management, business development, and joint venture relations. He's the founder of the Mexico Mining Center, the largest digital media platform for the Mexican mining industry, and he's the co-founder and organizer of the annual Discoveries Mining Conference, which will be held this year from October 5th through the 7th in Hermosillo, Sonora. Thanks again for joining us on The Rocks. Let's dive in. Well, Doug, thank you so much for coming on The Rocks today. How are you doing?
Everything's going fine here. It's nice to see you again, Emily.
Yeah, you as well. I know there's a bit of a time difference. So what are you drinking today?
Well, yes, that's a little unfortunate because I understand you have something a little bit more refreshing than I do. It's only 11:30 in the morning here, so I have a Starbucks latte.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Well, I always try to pick a cocktail or a bourbon or a whiskey that's thematic for our talk. So I actually found a Mexican whiskey to drink today. I don't know if you're a whiskey drinker, but Abasolo. I'm not sure if I'm going to say this right, but the distillery is in Jolotepec, the Abasolo, in Mexico State. And it's made with Mexican corn grown there in the area, and it's distilled in copper pots.
Well,
so it's even got a mining connection. But yeah, Abasolo, and I opened it and I was like, this will be interesting. It doesn't even really smell or taste like whiskey, but it's nice. It's smooth and really, really light. It's not dark at all.
Well, supposedly there's an agreement where tequila cannot be distilled in the United States and whiskey cannot be distilled in Mexico.
Oh, really?
So
I didn't know that. I had no idea.
Somehow or other they got around that, but that's interesting. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, and there was one other company that I saw, but it wasn't carried in the stores here. But this was available here in Florida. Yeah, Abasolo, whiskey of Mexico, and it's 100% ancestral corn, whatever that means.
Well, yeah.
good marketing.
Well,
but yeah.
I'll send you a bottle of Sonora and Bacanora.
Oh, okay.
That would be good for you. In fact, I was thinking I was adding a shot of that to my coffee this morning.
Your latte.
Well, it's a local variety of tequila. Okay. It's actually got a much more pungent smell and a stronger tequila flavor than the standard tequila.
Oh.
Yes, it's a different type of agave. It's a small native plant that has long, thin leaves. And it's made with copper stills, just like you would with any other distilled liquor. And it was illegal for a long time. They just made it legal over the last 5 years. Most of what's sold in the stores, though, isn't very good. You have to still go out to the ranches and find the homemade stuff.
Can you do tequila tours like you do in wine country or the Bourbon Trail? Do they do tequila distillery tours?
They do in Jalisco. That would be an idea for the Sonorans to do a Bacanora tour.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to have drivers that are willing to drive people from one to the other, right?
Yeah, well, we can do that with our mining services company.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, expand into the alcohol tour business.
just a small promotion there.
Yeah. We'll get into that, absolutely. But it's kind of fitting that you're drinking a latte because I know you have just been off the charts busy for the last year. I mean, the mining business in Mexico is through the roof. And I mean, I can certainly attest to that with our parent company, Analog Gold. Things have gone really, really well in Mexico. Despite COVID and everything going on, the industry seems to be doing really well.
Yes, I think we're at the start of a major boom. And it certainly does look like it has some legs to run on right now.
Mm-hmm.
The green energy movement, of course, is making an enormously increased demand for copper. The lithium is the most famous mineral that's gaining popularity right now. But all of the batteries, the wiring, the alternative energy like wind power, solar power, you name it, it requires much more copper than anything else.
Yeah.
And right now, Mexico is well endowed with copper deposits. And I was just speaking to a colleague this morning about that. And there's a large number of copper deposits in Mexico that were explored in the past that I believe have simply fallen along the wayside for one reason or another. And I think they're definitely good, excellent potential projects that should be picked up again now.
We'll be sure to send them all my way. Don't tell anybody else which ones they are. No, but and what do you think it is about Mexico that's attracting so much interest and so much activity?
Well, number one, it's the rich variety of mineral deposits that are here. It's the number one silver producer in the world, of course, but it's also within the top 10 producing countries in the world of gold, of zinc, of there's a large number of elements here. It's also number one producer of fluorite. That's one thing that a lot of people forget about.
Yeah.
But that's an important component of air conditioning units worldwide.
I didn't know that.
Yes, they use the fluor, and so there's a lot of industrial minerals here as well. There are good coal deposits in Coahuila. Mm-hmm. We have graphite deposits in Sonora. There's barite here as well. And so it's not just the precious metals, but also the industrial metals.
With everything that happened with COVID over the last year, I certainly see it within the supply chain. Companies are trying to onshore or maybe nearshore their supplies. Do you think that's helping Mexico in a way that maybe companies in the US or Canada that were buying raw materials from across the globe are now looking to get those from Mexico instead?
Well, Mexico, the mining is a worldwide industry, and Mexico's being one of the number one mining countries in the world. I know it's at least within the top 5 for mining investment. Mm-hmm. It produces the minerals needed worldwide. So, of course, it's nice to have suppliers that are nearby, but I don't think it's actually necessary. And right now there's a lot of demand for iron ore, for example, and we're receiving multiple calls per week from Chinese purchasers of iron ore. There's really not too much involvement of Chinese in Mexico, surprisingly enough. Yeah,
because they're certainly active in other countries in Central and South America, right? But not so much in Mexico.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know what the reason is. I know they pretty much control the mining in Africa and in most of Asia, but in Mexico they have a presence, but it's not such a big presence.
Well, and I know certainly the appeal for me of Mexico is partly proximity. And I always say that, with our analog mine in Sinaloa, you can fly a direct flight from Texas into Mazatlan, right, which is a nice beach resort town.
Sure.
Have a fruity cocktail on the ocean, drive in, visit the site and be back in time for dinner. I think that ease of getting to the site, and there's a lot of infrastructure in Mexico that makes it easier, I think, in these times to bring stuff into production too.
Well, that's true. It's one of the beauties of the country is you can have a world-class mining district within 40-minute drive of Mazatlan, for example.
Yeah.
And then if you drive just another couple of hours, you're back in the Wild West, where you're completely in the remote sierras of the Sierra Occidental. Mm. And we're, in fact, working right now on a project which is a world-class copper deposit called Santo Tomas with Oroco Resource Corporation. Mm-hmm. And it's in probably one of the most remote, rugged locations of Mexico. It's right on the corner where Sinaloa meets with Chihuahua and Durango.
And is part of that the remoteness and some of the challenge of development what led you just recently started your own mining services company?
Essentially, it was just finding a way to make a business out of something that we were already doing for years. And with our position online, with our contacts, being organizers of a major conference, we have all of the connections and the people, and our reason for being is actually to connect people. We're connectors. And so we've been doing that for years, and then just recently we decided to make it into a business, and it's turned into a booming business, even though we're barely just getting started.
Yeah, because there's so much demand for it, I'm sure.
Yes, there's a lot of demand. Most of what we do has been made possible because of the internet. And we have a large presence online, and new companies, anybody interested in mining in Mexico, eventually comes to our door. Nearly every person that I speak to on every phone call during the day needs something. And I can usually provide that. So...
well, including me and Prospector, right? I mean, I came knocking on your door because we wanted to do an AI product for Mexico, and you had a huge data set, right, of all the activities going on in the whole country. And in full disclosure to the listeners, the Doug and the Mexico Mining Center worked with Prospector to put together a huge interactive AI enabled map of lots of prospective areas in Mexico that's on the Prospector platform. And that was so cool because you and your team, you're tracking what every company in the country essentially is doing at any given time.
Yes, originally our idea with Mexico Mining Center was to provide a mining directory of the companies that were active in Mexico. And part of developing that directory, we had to track the press releases and see who was reporting on activities here. So it wasn't an easy process. It was a real time-consuming, tedious process to do so. But we found a good system to really weed through all of the different press releases and to identify the companies and locate their Mexican subsidiaries, which is not always that easy to do. Then as we started moving forward with that, we decided to add a map. So we started collecting this huge database, which is now being applied to the artificial intelligence.
Now, explain a little bit about that, Doug, because it was new to me, the subsidiary structure and how that works in Mexico. And it might be, for our listeners that aren't familiar with how mining works in Mexico, it might be interesting to hear about that.
To operate in Mexico, you have to operate either as a Mexican national or as a Mexican company. And so an international company that comes to operate or do anything in Mexico either has to set up a Mexican subsidiary, which in reality is not viewed as a subsidiary company in Mexico. The company is independent. It's a Mexican corporation. And it's not easy to find where those ties are between the mother company and the Mexican entity. Essentially, you have to have a Mexican entity to operate in Mexico, and that makes sense. And I believe there's still a requirement where a portion of the Mexican company should be owned by a Mexican national, and that may be as low as 1%.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I know that was something that people were really interested in when we launched that map, was the ability to see who owns different properties, right? To see who it's registered to, because also the properties are registered according to the initial leaseholder.
Yes, exactly. In the government database, you can only see who the original owner was, who originally requested the concession.
Which doesn't really help you much.
No, and there used to be information that was available to the public where you could look up the registry of each of the concessions and see who it changed hands to. That's since COVID came in, the government has been working on a hairstring with very few people in the offices, and that service is no longer available.
Mm.
So now to be able to find out who actually owns a concession, you really need to hire a mining lawyer who has the credentials, who can go into the government office and have access to the files.
Right, which can become pretty intensive.
It can be intensive because these files are not all located in one location.
Right.
You have different regional offices. And right now as well, the other complication in Mexico is that a lot of the people that work in the mining agency are no longer the experienced people. A lot of the experienced people have either resigned or they've been laid off. And so we have a new group of people who really don't have much experience who are working in these offices now. And
is that because of political changes, or?
I think it's mostly the political changes, yes.
Yeah. Well, speaking of political change, when for our listeners, there's a lot of news coming out of Peru with the new party taking over in Peru that is talking about big changes in corporate tax rates for mining companies in particular. And I wonder if you've seen any shift of interest from Peru to Mexico, or any impact from that.
Well, we've certainly received a lot of resumes from Peruvian geologists looking for work in Mexico now.
Because they're worried that investment will start to go down in Peru, or business will decrease, I would imagine.
Yes, absolutely. There's one Peruvian company in particular, which is Hochschild Mining, and it's a Jewish Peruvian company. And they're particularly concerned about the politics, and they view Mexico as paradise right now.
Yeah, so you might see capital as well as people moving over from Peru into Mexico.
Yeah, we have an interesting situation here with Morena being the leading political party. It's a left-leaning political party with President Lopez Obrador, who we call AMLO. He kind of panders to the left side of his party, to his grassroots supporters, but at the same time, he's pretty pragmatic, and he really hasn't harmed the industry like people expected would have happened.
Okay, so maybe a lot of rhetoric, perhaps, but not actually making any actual moves against the industry.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of big talk, and he'll make these big, fiery statements. It looks like he's just fighting tooth and nail against international mining companies who are coming in to rob the natural resources of Mexico. And he got out one day and he says, anyone who gives away natural resources to a foreign company is a traitor. But nobody's giving anything away, so that didn't really...
Telling it.
It was kind of an empty thing. It sounded really impressive, but it really wasn't a threat.
Yeah. And in Mexico as well, the states hold a pretty strong position in terms of the mining industry as well, right? It's not all dictated at the federal level in Mexico. Is that correct?
That's correct. And one of the things that AMLO did, which disturbed the mining community, was to eliminate the Subsecretary of Mines, which was the government organization that was kind of the liaison between the mining community and the government. So when he eliminated the Subsecretary of Mines and the idea of cutting back on unnecessary costs, it inspired his supporters and it scared away mining investment. But what he did in secretly is he decentralized the mining secretary, Subsecretary of Mines, and he formed a new division called the Secretary of Mine Development, with its offices in Chihuahua. And they perform the same functions, but they do it very quietly and they don't make any announcements, but they're actually very supportive of the industry.
But it hasn't, like you said, it hasn't seemed to impact or negatively impact investment over the last few years, at least. Things are still...
No, it's not affecting investment because the investors are, they're disgusted with some of the things he says in public, but they do look over the facts. And when they look at the facts, they see that it's not bad.
Yeah.
For example, there's a copper cobalt mine that's operating in Baja California near Santa Rosalia called El Boleo. And just prior to some elections that took place back in June, AMLO got out there to Santa Rosalia and he says that he was canceling the permit for the mine to expand operations. So this is a mining operation in effect, and AMLO just canceled their permits for no obvious reason. And he came out as being really against mining, and he fired up his base of supporters. But a few weeks later, I spoke to the director of mine development, who told me that he was just back from a trip to Santa Rosalia. And I said, "Oh, really?" I says, "How did things go over there?" "Oh, they went fine."
Thinking he's there to shut it down, right?
Yeah, the elections were over. So quietly, without making any public announcements, they decided to let the local people decide whether the mine would move forward or not. And so AMLO had canceled an operation which would have reduced the mine life by 10 years and would have eliminated over 3,000 jobs. And of course, the locals wanted to have that mine in operation and had all of its environmental permits in place and everything was authorized. So they haven't said anything in public, but the mine is going forward.
I think that's what makes it so important when people are evaluating a jurisdiction, perhaps that they're going to invest in or buy stock in a company that's operating in. There are always these nuances to what's going on in the country that the mine or the exploration project.
Mexico's a difficult place in a lot of ways for new people coming into the country because it seems like they have a lot of regulations, but nobody seems to know which regulations are the good ones. Yeah, the person you talk to, whoever you talk to, will tell you something different. So you don't really know who to believe.
Well, and in general, what would you say about the perception of the mining industry in Mexico? Is it generally positive or negative or?
Well, here in the northern part of the country, it's generally positive. When I first came to Mexico, a geologist asked me if I'd like to see a map of all of the mines in Mexico. And I said, "I'd love to see one." I said, where can I get one?" And he says, "You can buy it at any store along here at the Oxxo." Oxxo's like a local 7-Eleven here in Mexico. He says, just go there, and they have maps where you can find out where all the location of all the mines in northern Mexico. And I said, really? And then he says, yeah, it's just a highway map. And every place you see a black dot with the name of a town next to it, there's a mine right there. And he was right. Really, all of northern Mexico was settled and founded by mines. So it's fairly common here in Mexico still to find rich mining deposits right off the highway.
And do you think that helps on the exploration side as well? Because there's certainly a lot of exploration activity that's going on.
Well, there's a lot of exploration, and there's so many factors to go into play as to whether or not a deposit is discovered and later developed into a mine. It's just amazing to come across these rich deposits that are right on the surface that are, one of the major mining projects in the country right now is Vizsla Silver's Panuco project down in Sinaloa. And that's right on the highway that goes between Mazatlan and Durango, the old Devil's Spine Highway. And that was the only connection for 600 miles north or south, or at least going north anyway, to cross the Sierra Madres. So you had to cross from Mazatlan up into Durango. So nearly every geologist in the country at one point or another crossed right through the middle of their project. And now their main vein, I think, is only about 50 meters from the highway. So, these people just go right by some of these major deposits without ever noticing them. And other discoveries like Hazura Minerals, an Australian company that was operating here in Sonora, they found the Alacran project, which is within view of the Cananea copper mine, which Cananea is one of the largest copper mines in the world and world-class deposit, and the largest copper mine in Mexico. And you can see the mine in the background, and they found an outcrop with 2 kilos per ton silver right on the surface. So they have just sitting there, and geologists have walked over that time after time. And in fact, they presented that discovery in one of the conferences, our Discoveries conference. And I remember one of the speakers who was there actually kind of slunk down in his chair while they were talking about that discovery. And he told me later, he says that he was actually one of those geologists who walked over that ground and didn't think of looking for silver. He was looking for copper.
But that's such a common thing in the industry, right? If people go out and they're looking for one thing, you can literally stumble across something completely different than what you're looking for and miss it, right? There's so many stories like that in the mining industry. And
generally, you don't see something if you're not looking for it.
Yeah. I think that's the quote of the podcast, Doug. So the key takeaway is look for everytheverything, right? So
yes, you have to have an open mind. Don't be stuck on a theory or a model or deposit model. Nearly all deposit models were modeled after deposits that were discovered.
Not the other way around.
Not the other way around. Very few deposits are found off of the models.
Yeah. Well, and so you must have some fun stories then of doing work in Mexico. Is there one maybe you could share?
I can tell one fun story. I was working with a company, and an Englishman who was an investor was down here in Mexico with us, and we went to a remote town up in the Copper Canyon area, a place called Temoris, Chihuahua. It's a beautiful town. It's right along the Chihuahua Pacific Railroad. There's a beautiful waterfall right there at the train station. You leaving the station, you climb 1,000 meters up the canyon cliffs up to the top, and you're in a pine forest. And that's where the town is actually located. So anyway, this investor was up looking at some properties around the Temoris area, and I was taking him there to show it to him when he had to return quickly to make it to a meeting. He had a meeting within the next day or so. So I said, no problem. We can catch a ride real quick down to the train station, and the train always comes in late. I said, so we have time. We can talk to one of the local prospectors, and there's actually an American prospector who lives here, and he has a pretty nice project. I'd like you to meet him. So we're talking to this prospector when all of a sudden he says, "Oh, you guys are going out on the train, aren't you?" And we said, "Yes." And he says, "Well, I think I hear the train arriving right now." And there it was pulling into the station. And so we had to take off running, and we were running all the way uphill to try to get to the train. And I made it to the train right as it was pulling out of the station, and I could have jumped onto the caboose, but my partner was behind, and he would have been left behind, so we let the train go. Well, my friend, he was really upset, and he says, how is this possible? You told me the train arrives late every day, and this time it came early. You know, how is it possible it came early? And I said, well, I don't know. I said, maybe it's yesterday's train. But he wasn't happy about that at all. And so he was sitting over there really upset with me, and he was going to miss his meeting. And at that time, a locomotive with a caboose came racing into the station, and they were checking the train tracks along the way. So I asked the train driver there, I says, well, can we jump on board? Asked the engineer, and he says, sure, come on board. We're going down to Los Mochis. So I told Adam, jump on board. Here, we've got a ride. So we had the caboose to ourselves. We had bunk beds. We had coffee pot and a small radio with music.
It was like the VIP train.
Yes, exactly. And he says he couldn't even believe it, but the music they had on their little tape player was from some obscure English group from back in the early 70s. And he says, I can't believe I'm hearing this group here in Mexico.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
And we passed by the passenger train, left them way behind, and made it to our destination in record time.
Oh, that's funny. I can picture that in my head. I can see that like it's a movie. Absolutely. Always have adventures.
You always talk about the melting pot in the United States, but Mexico is a melting pot as well. You look at the northern Mexican music with the accordion, for example. That is actually from Germans.
Oh, is it?
Yes, it's all related to the breweries. The Germans established the breweries in northern Mexico and brought the music with them.
Oh, see, it all comes back to alcohol, too.
Yes, it goes back to alcohol, back to the rocks again. Yeah, it's the same story in Sinaloa. The Germans established the Pacifico Brewery and brought in the Oompa band with the tubas and all of the music that now is typical music of Sinaloa.
Yeah, when you're there on the beaches, the bands go by on the beach and play at every hotel and stuff as they go along, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, mariachi, the most typical music of Mexico, that's from the French term mariage. It's a marriage band, a wedding band.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I know for me, everywhere I've been in Mexico is so different from every other location. I mean, just the geography and the terrain and the cities are so different. I think everybody does have a picture of like a Mexican desert, essentially, I think, in their head when they think Mexico, right? And especially if you fly into Mexico City for the first time, for me, it was like, wow, everything's so green. I mean, you're up in the mountains and it's totally different than that image you have.
Well, right now in the heat of the summer, even Sonora is green right now with the monsoon rains.
Yeah.
But you get up into the mountains a little bit and it just turns into a jungle, even here in Sonora.
Yeah. Yep.
But you're right. Every region of Mexico has their own typical food, their culture. There's a lot of indigenous languages in different regions of the country. That's one of the things that I find fascinating about working in Mexico. It's always exciting.
Yeah.
The only thing you can be sure of here is that you'll have an adventure.
I would agree with that. Every trip I've had to Mexico has certainly ended in an adventure or two.
Yeah. You'll have some stories to tell.
Yeah. But I think that's such a fun part of our business, right? Doing work in fun and interesting places where you do end up having adventures when you're out in the exploration and the mining business. Absolutely.
I first came down to Mexico. I was working on a master's degree in geology at the time. And I got a call just out of the blue. In fact, it's a strange story. It's almost as if fate called, but I plugged the phone into the phone jack, lifted up the receiver, and the owner of the drilling company was on the other end of the line. It never rang.
Oh, weird.
And yes, in fact, I was moving, and I went back to make a phone call. That's why I had to plug it into the jack. But I picked up the line, and he was on the line, and he says, we're going to Mexico. And I said, well, when are we going? And he says, when are we going? So I jumped on board with a driller, went down, we drove to Temores, Chihuahua, in fact, the same town I was telling you about. Mm-hmm. I was working there for about 6 weeks. Everything was going well, and I made a call back to the owner of the drilling company, and he says, how are things going down there? I said, they're going fine. Great. He says, so what can I do for you? And I said, well, I just forgot to ask you one thing. I forgot to ask how much I'm being paid for this. He just laughed, and he says, what? I didn't tell you? And I said, no, you never said anything about what I was getting paid. And
then you hadn't asked, apparently, right?
I'd been there 6 weeks, and I had no idea. And so he just laughed, and he still didn't tell me. He says, you'll be happy. He said, I'll make you happy.
That's another quote. Just make sure you ask what you're getting paid earlier than 6 weeks.
Yeah, well, not always. Sometimes, the job is rewarding enough that you don't care what you're being paid.
You're going to get a lot of calls after that comment of people wanting to offer you positions, I think.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's happened before. I'm busy right now.
Right, that's right. Yeah. And so, and you've got the Discoveries Conference coming up in early October, right?
Yes, that's
so that'll
right.
be exciting. You held it last year, but I think you're expecting a larger crowd this year, I would imagine.
Yes, we were the only face-to-face mining conference of the year during the COVID pandemic, which was a very challenging, very stressful situation. But we held it with all of the health protocols. We took all the security measures, and it was a safe event for all who participated. And in fact, we were even acknowledged by President AMLO, President Lopez Obrador. He gives a talk, a boring talk every morning. But in one of his talks, he actually mentioned us by name and said that we had done an excellent job, and he was very proud that we were able to hold a physical event during these trying times. So that was nice. Yeah,
that was nice. Even if you're saying it was boring up until he mentioned your name, and then it got exciting.
Well, that was the only part that I found interesting in what he had to say. But he's not known for being a very enthusiastic speaker. He speaks very slowly, and you can speed up his recordings, and he's still speaking slowly.
To the 1.5 times.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Well, I'm glad he gave you a shout out and recognized the hard work that you guys were doing.
Yes, he did, and that was very much appreciated. And we felt really nice that we were actually recognized by the president for what we had done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that is great. And along the lines of that, with what you mentioned about some of the politics and the situation in Mexico with the high level of interest, is there anything that you think investors should keep in mind or be looking for if they're evaluating an investment in Mexico or a project in Mexico?
Well, I think it's just the normal things you have to be careful about. You just need to be sure that you're investing in the people. There's plenty of projects here. There's good projects, but the best projects aren't worth much if you don't have the right people. So you're best to look at people who've had a good track record, who have a good reputation, and that have some experience in Mexico.
Yeah, it's important to have the experience in Mexico.
Yes, it's a big learning curve. And that's part of the thing that we saw as a motivation for establishing a mining service company, which we've just put together this year. And that's to kind of help facilitate people to move forward more quickly and on solid ground and help them jump past that learning curve that takes. It's so expensive and time consuming to go through mistake after mistake until you figure out how to do things. So if you can get to somebody who's trustworthy, who can help guide you along, at least direct you towards the right groups, then you're far ahead of the game by doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo that. And then I guess I've been ending my last few podcasts with the same question, Doug. So if you could wave a magic wand and bring one innovation or change to the industry, what would you love to see happen in the mining industry?
Wow. Well, I'd like to see the industry boom, which I think is coming to be a reality soon. Looking at it from a contractor's perspective, the price of drilling needs to rise. The drilling contractors are operating for less money than they operated back in the early 90s. And in spite of that, over the last 30 years, everything has gone up in price, and they're still at the same price per meter.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of competition, but the competition is not going to last very long if they don't make a profit of what they're doing. I'm looking forward to this boom being a good boom for everyone in the industry.
Mm-hmm. What is it they say? A rising tide lifts all ships?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I will cheers to that. Cheers to a boom in the industry. And thank you for coming on the rocks, even if you did drink a latte instead of a cocktail. And I look forward to seeing you at the Discoveries Conference in person in October. We'll certainly be there and look forward to having you back on the podcast soon.
Well, Discoveries is certainly shaping up to be the business networking event of the year for the Mexican mining industry. And we're gaining a lot of steam. We're getting a lot of excitement here. And this year we're having it in the mining capital of Mexico, which is Hermosillo, Sonora.
Yeah.
It'll be a great event, and I think you'll meet a lot of great people there.
And I'm bound to have some adventures.
And you're bound to have some adventures.
All right. Cheers, Doug. Thanks so much for coming on.
All right. Thank you. Thank you a lot, Emily. It's nice to see you.
Thank you to our guest and my colleague, Doug Coleman, for joining us for this episode of On the Rocks. To learn more about Doug and the Mexico Mining Center, go to mexicominingcenter.com and check them out on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. For more about Prospector, go to prospectorportal.com or check us out on Instagram at ProspectorAI and LinkedIn at Prospector Portal. Thanks for joining us on the rocks. Until next time, keep your glasses full and your ice cold. Cheers.